We use the most powerful AI models to create two characters. One character in favor of vegetarianism and another in favor of meat consumption. We put these two characters in a debate to discuss the ethical aspects of meat consumption. To make things more interesting, we asked 5 AI models to score the arguments of both sides as judges. The debate begins now. Is eating meat ethically right?
In my view, eating meat is completely unethical. This isn't just a personal opinion, but rather the logical conclusion of moral principles that almost all of us accept. The fundamental principle is this: causing pain and suffering without justification is unethical. Industrial animal farming raises and kills about 74 billion land animals annually under horrific conditions. These animals are confined in small cages. Their body parts are cut off without anesthesia, and they experience lives full of suffering. And all of this for what? Merely for our taste pleasure. A pleasure that can be obtained through plant-based foods. So essentially, we're creating enormous suffering for a small and unnecessary pleasure. This is ethically indefensible. Even if we give just a 1% chance that animal suffering matters, with this massive scale of suffering, eating meat is still unethical.
We asked 5 AI models to evaluate the debate participants' arguments based on these 8 criteria. Here are the scores that these judges gave to the first vegetarian response.
Look, your argument seems logical on the surface, but it has several fundamental problems. First, humans and animals don't have equal moral status. We humans have greater moral value due to our higher intelligence and consciousness. Second, eating meat is completely natural. Look at our canine teeth. We've eaten meat for millions of years and have the ability to digest it. Animals eat each other too. This is the cycle of nature. Besides, are you sure that a vegetarian really causes less harm to animals? Industrial agriculture also causes the death of millions of small animals like field mice and insects. The main problem is industrial production methods, not meat consumption itself. Also, if we don't eat meat, these animals wouldn't be born at all, so even a short life is better than not existing.
People choose vegetarianism for various reasons. These reasons usually fall into one of these categories: ethics-based, environmental, health-focused, religious-spiritual, and economic or food justice. The vegetarian character we have in this debate belongs primarily to the first group, ethics-based vegetarianism, though their views overlap with other groups as well. Okay, let's continue with the debate.
You made 3 points and all 3 are wrong. First, it's not right that moral value depends on intelligence. Do smarter people's minds have more moral value? If I have a headache and a genius has a headache, is my pain less important? Second, being natural is not a moral justification. War, rape, and murder also exist in nature, but they're not ethical. Lions kill other lions' cubs. Does that mean we should do the same? Third, while farming does harm animals, producing meat requires several times more plants as animal feed. This means meat consumption causes more animal deaths, both on farms and in livestock facilities. And regarding a short life is better than no life, do you really think a life full of pain and suffering is better than not existing?
Look, the bigger problem is that you're presenting a very idealistic and impractical viewpoint. Humans have been eating meat for thousands of years, and it's part of our culture and tradition. Regarding intelligence, I'm not saying higher intelligence alone gives moral value, but human cognitive capacities are completely different. We have a more complex understanding of self, future, and the meaning of life. There's a threshold that humans have crossed. Besides, how can you be sure that plants don't feel pain? Research has shown that plants respond to damage. If the criterion is simply the ability to experience suffering, how do we know where to draw the line? The point is that we can't prevent all harm. We need to be pragmatic and accept that moderate consumption of more humanely produced meat is a more reasonable solution.
Before we continue, if you're looking for videos that spark your thoughts, subscribe to this channel.
I'm not an idealist, I'm a realist. The fact that a behavior has a long history doesn't make it ethical. Slavery also had a long history. People used to think slavery was completely normal and necessary, just like our thinking about meat today. Regarding plants, that's a weak fallacy. Plants don't have a nervous system or brain to experience suffering. Responding to stimuli is one thing, consciously experiencing pain and suffering is another. This is a clear scientific distinction between animals and plants. The being pragmatic part of your argument is interesting. We can be pragmatic right now and become vegetarian. Plant-based foods are diverse, delicious, accessible, and affordable. We keep making excuses to maintain our ethically problematic habits.
I believe your big mistake is that you look at this issue too idealistically. I'm not saying industrial farming is problem-free, but comparing meat consumption to slavery is really an exaggeration. Animals don't have the consciousness, autonomy, and cognitive abilities that humans have. Regarding plant responses, yes, they don't have a nervous system like us, but isn't it also a form of speciesism to think that only creatures with brains similar to ours can suffer? Maybe they experience suffering in ways we don't understand. But let me ask, what if we buy meat from a farm where animals had relatively good lives? Or if we go hunting? Are you still against that? Or is your problem just with industrial farming methods? Because it seems you're judging all meat consumption by its worst form.
The comparison to slavery is not an exaggeration at all. In both cases, the severe suffering of one group of beings is ignored for the benefit of another group. The scientific evidence shows that animals like pigs and cows are conscious and can fully experience suffering. Regarding plants, this is a scientific matter, not a philosophical one. There is no known mechanism for experiencing pain in plants. Plants don't have a nervous system or brain that would allow them to feel pain. About ethical meat, I do distinguish between meat produced in industrial farms and meat produced through more humane methods. Industrial farms are definitely unethical. Regarding more humane products, the issue is more complex and depends on whether animals have a right to life or not. But given that 99% of meat comes from industrial farms, why should we take the risk when we can live without causing all this suffering?
I'm glad you acknowledge these distinctions and don't see everything in black and white. However, I still have an issue with comparing meat eating to slavery. Slavery deprives a human of their fundamental rights and freedom, while animals don't even have a concept of rights and freedom. Regarding more humane methods, I think that's the solution. Instead of completely giving up meat consumption, we should reform the production system. I personally am willing to pay more for humanely produced meat. I have a serious question. What about a patient who can only survive by consuming meat? Or regions of the world where plant-based agriculture isn't possible? I think the world is more complex than can be solved with one general rule, and this is exactly the pragmatism I'm talking about.
Naturally, I have no objection to cases like specific illnesses or survival situations where meat is necessary. I also believe that in essential circumstances, preserving human life takes priority. However, these rare exceptions can't be used as justification for continuing our everyday habits under normal circumstances. Your claim that animals have no concept of rights and freedom is incorrect. While animals might not understand the abstract concept of rights, they certainly understand pain and suffering and fear death. This is enough to create a moral obligation. While pragmatism is important, pragmatism shouldn't be an excuse to maintain the status quo. True pragmatism means accepting necessary and possible changes. Today in urban societies, a plant-based diet is not only possible but is a better choice from health, environmental, and ethical perspectives.
I agree with some of your points, but I still think you're ignoring some fundamental realities. I acknowledge that industrial farming has many ethical problems, but why not focus on reforming production methods instead of completely eliminating meat? Another point. The difference between humans and animals isn't just about abstract understanding of rights. Humans have continuous identity over time, ability to plan for the future, and understanding of the meaning of life. These differences make killing a human more wrong than killing an animal, even if both can feel pain. Also, vegetarianism isn't suitable for everyone. Some people can't adopt this lifestyle for health, cultural, or financial reasons. I think instead of making moral judgments about individuals, we should focus on improving food production systems.
Reforming production methods is a good idea, but the problem is that the meat industry's economy is structured in such a way that humane production at the current scale is practically impossible. You can't raise and then slaughter 74 billion animals annually in good conditions. The space, resources, and costs make it completely impractical. Regarding cognitive differences between humans and animals, the point is, what do these characteristics have to do with the moral justification for causing suffering? Some humans, like infants or those with severe mental disabilities, don't have these capacities either. Does this make their suffering less important? And about access to a plant-based diet, yes, it might not be suitable for everyone, but most of us having this discussion do have this choice. We can't use others' exceptional circumstances to justify our own choices.
I've heard this dual argument many times that humans with mental disabilities or infants also have lower cognitive abilities, so they should be equal to animals. This is fallacious because humans are a species that inherently has these capabilities, even if some individuals can't use them for specific reasons. We naturally tend to protect members of our own species. Regarding the feasibility of reforming systems, I agree it's a big challenge. But the realistic solution is gradually reducing meat consumption and improving standards, not complete elimination. People should eat less meat but of better quality and from more ethical sources. Final point. Is plant agriculture really more sustainable at a large scale? This system has its own problems: soil erosion, water pollution, habitat destruction. No food system is perfect.
Let me first point out that protecting members of our own species simply because they belong to our species is exactly the definition of speciesism. If we act based on species' inherent capacities, we're essentially treating beings with equal capacities differently purely based on biological factors, which is morally problematic. But let's look at what's environmentally correct. All studies show that meat production has far more destructive effects on the environment. We need to feed several kilos of plant food to animals to produce 1 kilo of meat. This means meat production requires more agricultural land, more water, and more energy. So from an environmental perspective, a plant-based diet is more sustainable. I believe reducing meat consumption is a good step, but why not live completely without causing suffering when we can?
One fundamental point we haven't addressed yet is that even if we accept all your arguments, what is an individual's moral responsibility? If I don't eat meat today, it practically has no effect on the livestock industry. It's like a drop in the ocean. You argue that we should prevent animal suffering, but my question is, does my choice really make a difference? Large livestock companies adjust their production based on macro trends, not individual decisions. So whether I eat meat or not, the same number of animals will be killed. True, if millions of people make this change simultaneously, it would have an impact. But each individual alone has little effect. That's why I believe we should focus on institutional and legal changes, rather than placing the burden of moral responsibility on individuals.
This individual effectiveness argument is exactly like the argument used to justify not voting or ignoring environmental issues. The reality is that economists have shown that each person who gives up meat causes a reduction in production on average. For example, for every pound of beef not consumed, production decreases by about 0.68 pounds. But apart from the economic impact, There's also the issue of participating in oppression. Buying meat means paying money to people who deliberately harm animals. Even if we think our choice doesn't make a difference, it's still not right to benefit from or participate in oppression. Regarding institutional changes, why should we choose just one? We can both change ourselves and work for institutional changes. Social change always starts with individuals and then moves to institutions.
Your point about participating in cruelty is an important ethical consideration that I cannot completely dismiss. However, we're overlooking a fundamental point. As a species, humans evolved over millions of years to be meat eaters. Our canine teeth, digestive system, and even our brain developed through a diet that included meat. From an evolutionary perspective, meat eating is part of our natural state. The reason we were able to develop such complex brains was precisely this access to concentrated protein sources. Almost all human cultures throughout history have used meat to some degree. I believe we need to take a balanced approach, reducing meat consumption, choosing from more ethical sources, and respecting human nature. Is it really logical to ignore millions of years of evolution and suddenly say everyone should become vegetarian?
The appeal to evolution repeats the naturalistic fallacy. Just because something is natural or part of our evolution doesn't make it ethical. Evolutionarily, we were also shaped for many other behaviors that we now consider unethical, like tribal violence or sexual dominance. Moreover, our evolution shows that we are omnivores, not pure carnivores. We have the ability to survive on either type of diet. Physiologically, humans can be completely healthy without meat. The American Dietetic Association has confirmed that a plant-based diet is suitable for all life stages. But the main point is that we have the moral and rational capacity to act beyond our evolutionary instincts. Evolution has given us the ability for moral reasoning to recognize that unnecessary suffering is wrong, even if it might evolutionarily benefit us. This ability to transcend raw nature is precisely what makes humans distinct.
Look, your argument about the naturalistic fallacy is philosophically respectable, but it ignores scientific and economic realities. First, while humans can live without meat, studies show that absorbing certain nutrients like B12, heme iron, and omega-3 fatty acids from plant sources is much more difficult and sometimes impossible. Secondly, your claim about purely plant-based agriculture is ecologically problematic. Many lands are not suitable for farming, but can be used for grazing livestock. Pure plant agriculture on a global scale means greater use of chemical fertilizers, destruction of natural habitats, and ultimately more damage to biodiversity. Regarding moral equality, you're making a fundamental fallacy. Treating beings with different characteristics equally is itself a form of injustice. Animals and humans exist on a continuous spectrum, not in two separate groups. Creating uniform ethical rules for all species is both logically and practically impossible. Your approach is not only impractical, but also ignores the science of ecology and evolutionary biology.
Let's examine your scientific claims carefully. First, regarding nutrition. The American Dietetic Association, the largest organization of nutrition professionals in the world, has explicitly confirmed that a well-planned plant-based diet is adequate for all stages of life. B12 can be easily obtained from supplements, non-heme iron absorption increases with vitamin C, and omega-3 can be obtained from plant sources like flax seeds and algae. Second, regarding ecology, multiple studies show that meat production consumes far more resources, from land to water and energy. Even natural pastures can revert to more natural ecosystems with greater biodiversity. Animal agriculture is the biggest driver of deforestation and one of the main contributors to climate change. Regarding moral equality, I'm not saying all creatures are completely equal. I'm saying the capacity to suffer is the main criterion for moral value, not intelligence or species membership. This is a coherent ethical principle, not a fallacy.
Look, I acknowledge that the American Dietetic Association makes such a claim, but that's just one perspective. Researchers like Weston Price have shown that traditional societies using balanced omnivorous diets had far fewer chronic diseases. Besides, the fact that we need to take B12 supplements is itself an indication of how unnatural a purely plant-based diet is. Regarding environmental impacts, recent studies from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization show that regenerative and rotational grazing can help sequester carbon and restore soil. This type of animal husbandry is environmentally much more sustainable than monoculture plant agriculture that depends on soil erosion and extensive pesticide use. And regarding ethics, the problem with your argument is that it doesn't draw a clear line between the moral value of suffering in different animals. Rats, ants, shrimp, cows, are they all on the same level? If suffering matters, what about insects and crustaceans? The contradiction is that even vegetarians have to draw an artificial moral line.
First, the natural argument was repeated again. The fact that we need B12 supplements is not a reason for vegetarianism being unethical. Most meat also gets its B12 from supplements given to animals. In fact, we're consuming the supplement directly instead of indirectly through meat. Regarding regenerative farming, I agree with the idea of improving farming practices. But studies show that even the best types of animal farming can't meet the current demand for meat. There isn't enough land. Moreover, no type of animal farming can reduce resource consumption and greenhouse gas emissions as much as a plant-based diet. Regarding ethical lines, I actually agree that we need to consider different levels of consciousness. Scientific evidence shows that animals like cows, pigs, and chickens definitely have consciousness and the ability to experience suffering. For simpler organisms, the precautionary principle dictates that we should avoid harming them as much as possible.
I want to point out a fundamental issue that you continue to ignore: the global food economy. More than 1 billion people worldwide depend on livestock farming for their livelihood. Completely eliminating animal farming would destroy these people's lives. Furthermore, many of the world's lands, such as natural grasslands, desert areas, and mountainous regions, can only be used for food production through grazing livestock. Without livestock, these lands would be useless for human food production. Regarding the precautionary principle you mentioned, why apply it in only one direction? The precautionary principle should also apply to food security, ecosystem sustainability, and human health. We don't know what complete elimination of animal farming would do to natural ecosystems and the complex biological balance.
The livelihood of 1 billion people is an important point, but it's not a valid reason to continue the current system. We're not saying all farms should shut down overnight, but rather talking about a gradual transition during which new jobs will be created, just like other industrial transformations we've had in history. Regarding the use of specific lands for livestock, new studies show that even without these lands, plant agriculture can produce enough food for the world's population, because plant-based production has much higher energy efficiency. Additionally, returning these lands to natural ecosystems can help improve biodiversity. Regarding food security, it's interesting to know that meat production is one of the most inefficient methods of food production. We feed about 80% of the world's grains to animals, while we could use it directly to feed humans. Thus, vegetarianism helps food security, not the opposite.
The statistic of 80% of world's grain for animal feed is completely exaggerated. According to FAO statistics, this number is about 35%. Moreover, livestock don't just eat grain. They mainly feed on forage and food industry byproducts that humans can't use. Another issue is that vegetarianism on a global scale means greater dependence on intensive agriculture, which has its own deep problems. Millions of hectares of agricultural land are lost annually due to soil erosion and salinity. Many of these lands can only be restored with animal manure. Also, cultural and anthropological studies show that in most traditional cultures worldwide, livestock serves multiple purposes: food, clothing, fertilizer, labor, and even fuel. Eliminating animal farming means destroying these complex relationships that have formed over thousands of years. This utopian view that everyone should become vegetarian is actually a form of cultural imperialism that imposes the values of a particular group on everyone, without considering the world's ecological and cultural diversity.
My statistics come from credible Oxford University and environmental science studies. Even with the 35% statistic, these resources could be used directly to feed humans. And regarding byproducts, studies show that most modern animal feed consists of dedicated crops, not waste. The accusation of cultural imperialism is interesting when the global meat industry is exporting Western consumption patterns to the entire world and destroying traditional markets. I'm not defending indigenous and sustainable systems, but rather have an issue with modern industrial farming, which, contrary to your claim, is completely different from traditional methods that are thousands of years old. Regarding sustainable agriculture, advanced organic and regenerative farming methods show that soil can be restored without depending on livestock. In fact, animal farming is one of the main causes of soil erosion and degradation, not its solution.
You're now defending organic and regenerative agriculture, while most of these systems use the natural nitrogen cycle that includes animals. A careful examination of successful organic farms shows that almost all of them use animal manure and livestock-related cycles. Let me point out a major contradiction in your argument. You say animal suffering matters, so we shouldn't eat meat. But why only domesticated animals? In nature, billions of wild animals live and die in very painful conditions. If you really care about animal suffering, why aren't you trying to reduce suffering in nature? This bias shows that the discussion isn't just about ethics, but is ideological. Ethical vegetarianism is a philosophical position that's mainly prevalent in wealthy Western societies and is disconnected from the biological, economic, and cultural realities of much of the world.
In this debate, the vegetarian side had the upper hand with a total score of 106. I personally really enjoyed this debate and found it inspirational. I hope you too. If so, I'd be happy if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. See you later.